Here's a guy who gives some goofy rebuttals to some sensible answers to questions he had for atheists.
In summary, atoms don't have any features such as knowledge, will, life, feelings, vision, and hearing. So the question is, how can atoms give these features to living things?
I don't consider any of those things to be features. They are simply activities carried out by atoms when they interact with one another in particular ways. Sometimes atoms bond, sometimes they fuse, and sometimes they live and will and hear, etc. Of course, a single atom can't bond, fuse, or live. These are activities that can only be carried out by multiple atoms. There need to be at least 2 atoms to bond or to fuse, and several more to live, will, hear, etc. But just as bonding and fusing are things that atoms do, so is living.
So we said that it's so clear that there must be a creator behind the atoms. And here are some objections. Atoms gain more properties in the form of molecules already. Thus, it's obvious that the sum is more than the parts. When 2 atoms form a molecule, the molecule has a number of properties that neither atoms have. Fire comes from non-fire. Oxygen and hydrogen atoms bond to form water, which has different attributes from the original atoms, seemingly debunking your whole premise. Okay, there are many similar comments, but I think these friends didn't get the point. They said that atoms gain new properties when they form molecules. Okay, but our question comes exactly at this point. We ask, how can it be?
I think it's a category error to think of life, hearing, will, etc. as being properties. Rather, they are behaviors. No supernatural being needs to step in to cause these behaviors. I think the confusion arises from the fact that a single atom can't live, hear, see, etc., but an organism made of atoms can. The reason for this is the same as the reason why atoms can bond and fuse, but a single atom cannot. It's simply because these are group activities, not activities that can be carried out alone. The fact that 2 atoms can bond or fuse, but one alone can do neither, is not because God bestowed that faculty upon pairs of atoms and denied them to single atoms. I don't see why a God is required to explain why some activities that can be carried out by groups of things cannot be carried out by individual things.
These friends wrote in the comments again what we presented in the video. How can different features arise in molecules and living things when these features do not exist in atoms?
Life is just a process carried out by atoms. There are states of matter like solid, liquid, or gas, which can only really be said to be properties of the movements and interactions of the atoms that make up that matter rather than properties of the atoms themselves. A single water molecule cannot be said to be liquid or gaseous. Those are properties of the relations between and movements of collections of those molecules rather than any molecule. Nothing supernatural needs to intervene to grant properties to the movements of and relations between molecules that the molecules themselves do not have.
Be honest, is it an answer to say, but it's constantly happening? This is not to question the truth, but to imprison the mind to what the eye sees.
I agree that it's always happening is not a good argument. Rather, my argument is that there is a distinction between the properties of processes, events, or patterns on the one hand, and the properties of the things carrying out those processes, events, or patterns on the other hand. No supernatural intervention is required to get atoms to carry out processes, and no supernatural intervention is required for processes to have different properties than things. Processes and things are distinct, so they naturally have distinct properties, even if things are carrying out those processes.
The second question is, why should even an extinguishing water form after the combination of hydrogen and oxygen? Is there such a necessity requiring that formation? No.
Yes, given the way we observe atoms and molecules behaving, no other result could follow.
I mean, we can imagine infinite alternative ways of acting for these 2 elements. Why not them? Why this way of acting all the time? Why not another rule?
Well, clearly there must be a God who made it that way, right? This doesn't really lead to an ultimate explanation. Just as you can ask, why does physics have the laws and constants that it does, rather than some other laws and constants one could imagine, you could also ask, if you believe in God, why did God create these particular laws and constants rather than other laws and constants that we can imagine? My answer to why the laws and constants are the way they are is because there was never a time when they were different. It makes sense to me to ask why changes occur. Changes seem to typically have causes. I don't see why a state of affairs that has always been what it is needs a cause. I can understand why changes might need causes. I do not understand why constants need causes. The laws and constants of the universe have never changed. They have always been what they are. Why then do they need a cause? The mere fact that we can imagine them being different doesn't necessitate a cause for how they actually are. We can imagine God being different from how Scripture portrays him as well. Does that mean that something must have caused God to be the way he is instead of some different way? If we don't need to explain why God is the way he is instead of some other way, why do constants and physical laws need any explanation?
What causes these particles to follow some specific rules and not follow the other infinite possible alternatives?
There are different conceivable alternatives, but we have absolutely no reason to believe that those other conceivable alternatives are actually possible. We can conceive of many impossible things.
At this point, only the concept of will can explain the prevailing of a specific rule among infinite possible alternatives.
If we need an explanation for why we have the constants we do instead of other conceivable constants, why do we not need an explanation for why God wills the things he does instead of other conceivable things he could will? And what even is a will if it isn't fundamentally a neurological phenomenon, that is to say, an activity carried out by matter?
Atoms cannot form a human by coming together and agreeing.
Why would they need to agree? Atoms don't need to agree to bond or fuse, so why would they need to agree to carry out any other collective activity? Atoms no more need to agree to form a human than they need to agree to form anything else. Water molecules in a cloud don't need to agree to form a raindrop, for example, because that is an inevitable consequence of what water molecules naturally do on their own. Forming a human being is also a natural consequence of chemicals doing what they naturally do on their own.
There must be a creator to control them.
That would only be the case if they behaved randomly, which they do not.
Bricks are prisoners, architect is judge. Atoms are prisoners, God is judge. Okay, here are some objections. There is no judge or prisoner, yet you assume both. Why is that? To assume that everything has to be ordered and commanded by something is just silly. Weird question and weird reasoning. Okay, the example we gave was to show a particular condition showing us the existence of a rule. And the rule is that two opposite natures cannot come together. Judge in the comparison stands for the nature of authority, and the prisoner stands for the nature of captivity. One of them is the subject, the active being, and the other is its object, the passive being. And these two natures are totally opposite to each other, like dark and light, hot and cold, existence and absence. Just as something cannot be existent or absent at the same time, it's also impossible for an atom to give orders and take orders at the same time.
Any medium of interaction is metaphorically both giving and taking orders at the same time. Imagine 3 dominoes standing next to each other. If the first domino tips over, it will ultimately cause the third domino to tip over. The second domino in the middle is both caused to tip over and, at the same time, tipping the third domino over as well. It is both being caused to tip over by the first domino and causing the third domino to tip over at the same time. It is, in this sense, both taking and giving orders at the same time.
Otherwise, the atom will turn out to hold two contradictory natures. If all the atoms are considered as the captives of single authority of God, there won't be any problem and there is no opposing to logic as the natures are separate and they do not combine. But if we don't refer to a God and say atoms are leading these processes, then we will have to accept that an atom is both an authority and a captive at the same time, holding two separate natures.
Well, as I just illustrated in the earlier example, material objects can both cause and be caused to do something at the same time. So there is nothing contrary to logic going on here. Actions carried out by atoms can both be caused and, in turn, cause other actions at the same time.
But this is a contradiction. Each atom will have a nature of authority similar to God had, figuring all the relations with each other, having the knowledge of the whole system of human body, commanding and moving huge armies of atoms.
No knowledge is required. Physiology is an unintended, inevitable consequence of atoms just doing what they naturally do. It just unfolds on its own. Atoms neither know or need to know that they are creating a human body, any more than water molecules know or need to know that the electromagnetic force is bringing them together to form a raindrop.
But at the same time, these apparently most active beings will be passive and captivated objects in the hands of the other atoms.
Given that events can cause second events, which can in turn cause third events, and all of these events can temporally overlap, I don't see why this is a problem.
Everything would be a chaos, because a single commander can arrange the affairs of an army with great ease, their positions for example. But if the soldiers become the commanders themselves, no order will be apparent at all.
As long as the behavior of the soldiers isn't random, just as the behavior of atoms is not random, then the behavior of the army as a whole will also not be random. It may be complex and consequently difficult to predict, but it would not be chaotic. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.